Hello, good evening. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to Stern Law Firm's Wednesday night Facebook Live. We're also streaming on YouTube. We are here tonight to speak in both English and Spanish a little bit about citizenship and also to answer any of your questions as we begin moving into the 4th of July weekend holiday here in the U.S. Sometimes that brings about a sentiment of patriotism, right? And the excitement that people feel being U.S. citizens. So we thought this would be a great topic to address today on July 3rd, the day before the July 4th holiday. Bienvenidos a todos a nuestro Facebook Live. Hoy vamos a hacer una plática más que todo acerca de la ciudadanía. Ahorita viene el 4 de julio y todos están celebrando estar aquí en los Estados Unidos. Entonces pensamos que fue una buena idea para hacer una plática acerca de qué son los requisitos de naturalización. Por los que ya están disponibles para sacar su ciudadanía. Mucho de esto va a ser en inglés, en parte porque para sacar su ciudadanía, en casos menos que los que han sido residentes por más de 25 años, 20 a 25 años, sí se tiene que ser en inglés. Entonces sería una buena práctica. Por favor, pongan sus preguntas aquí, aunque no sean de ciudadanía, y les puedo contestar cualquier pregunta durante la audiencia que estamos haciendo aquí. Y pónganos like, compártenlo con sus amigos, okay? So we're going to get started with citizenship. In the meantime, please go ahead and put your questions in the comments. We will try and get to as many of those as possible. It does not have to just be about citizenship. As you know, Stern Crimmigration, we focus on both the criminal and the immigration side. We focus on defending people who do not have lawful status or are not citizens on both the immigration and the criminal legal side. We know that sometimes people have gotten caught up in issues or made mistakes or had difficult times in their past. And our goal is to help still defend that American dream, both on the criminal side and immigration. But like I said, it is 4th of July weekend coming up, so we all celebrate the joy that it is to be in the United States and have the freedoms that we have, that so many of our servicemen have fought for. So many people have worked hard to create a great life here in the United States and continue to allow us those freedoms. And one of those exciting things is when you are a citizen, one of the most important freedoms, of course, that you get is the ability to vote in an election. You can only vote in a federal election if you are a U.S. citizen. And so that's a very special privilege that is reserved for U.S. citizens. And we have been very successful in getting people through that path. It's not an easy path, and it's not necessarily a quick one to get there, but it is certainly appreciated by all who have gained their citizenship. And one of my favorite types of cases to take is get people to that final point and see the joy on their faces when they get their citizenship. So I'm really excited to talk about some of the qualifications. Most of this is going to be in English. You can put your questions in English and Spanish, but that is because one of the first criteria for becoming a citizen and doing your citizenship test is that you do have to have a fairly solid knowledge of the English language. It doesn't have to be perfect, but your entire interview in general is going to be done in English. So all the questions and answers that you're asked will be in English, and the officer will be assessing whether you have a decent understanding. Your civics test, which we'll talk about in a minute, is going to be in English as well. And so all of that is a very important component. There are a couple of exceptions. Essentially, if you have been a lawful permanent resident for more than 20 years and you qualify within an age range, there is an exception to where sometimes you can do your test in Spanish or your language of origin. So that is something that's definitely worth speaking to an attorney. If you've been a lawful permanent resident for about 20 years, but you haven't been able to quite master or feel comfortable with, at least in that stressful situation of being in an interview, sure that you would make it through that interview, then that's something that we can help you with. Um, let's see. So let's talk about qualifications. And like I said, please put your questions in, and hopefully some people can ask some good questions for us today. So, first and foremost, to become a US citizen, you first have to be a lawful permanent resident. So, this is geared towards people who have reached that point or on the verge of reaching their point of lawful permanent residence. That can be through an employment visa. It could be through a U visa where you've gained your green card. It could be through a family petition. So, the lawful permanent residence is the step before citizenship. And in general, you need to be a lawful permanent resident for at least 5 years prior to applying for citizenship. So that's the general rule. We'll talk about an exception in a moment. But 5 years, and you have to have resided and show that you've resided in the US for at least half of that 5 year period. Okay. So once you've been here for more than that 5 year period, that means essentially any trips you've taken didn't take more than 6 months of your year outside the US. And that is something that when we speak to you about naturalization, we're actually going to ask you questions about your travels. But if you've not traveled for more than 6 months a year, we go back and calculate that you've been here long enough. Okay. The exception to this is if you are applying for a citizenship through having received your green card through your spouse. If you received a marital green card and you have your full 10-year green card or in the process of getting your full 10-year green card, you actually only have to wait 3 years before you can apply for US citizenship, as long as you are still in that bona fide marriage, not just for the purpose of immigration, but you guys are still in that relationship, then you can apply after 3 years. If for some reason something has happened, you're not with your spouse anymore, then you can still apply after 5 years. And those can be a little bit more intricate applications because we do have to do things similar to what you've done in the process for your green card. So, this is also another great opportunity to speak to an attorney if that is your case to help determine that. Okay. And Demi, thank you for your question. I will get to it in just one moment because I think that's a really good question. Um, but in terms of the timing, I do just want to say, it's generally 5 years. There also are some exceptions in terms of people who are serving in the military, lawful permanent residents who are serving in the military. So if that is you, first of all, thank you for your service. And second of all, give us a call and we can talk with you and see if you're eligible to go ahead and apply for naturalization a little bit early. Okay. So since we're talking about time periods, let me go to Demi's question. And so, Demi, thank you. This says, my mom has more than 20 years being a permanent resident, but she doesn't want to proceed with her NATs because she doesn't speak English that much. Is there a way for her to not make the English test? So, yes, potentially. So, what we would need, Demi, and I don't want you to share it here because it's public, but we would need to know the exact date so we can calculate the amount of time and your mother's age, because generally it's someone 55, 50 or older who has been a lawful permanent resident for more than 20 years. There's an exception that we can mark and ask for the entire process to be done with an interpreter in their language. So absolutely, give us a call, reach out to us. We can check your mother's green card, make sure everything else that we'll talk about today is good, and there is that option. If you have a medical disability, that is a very, very rare case that might be served as an exception to the having to take the civics test or something like that. Again, if you have unfortunately, I've had clients with traumatic brain injuries who just really have issues and, have the documentation, the doctor information, and there's a particular form that we've assisted them with. In some cases like that, USCIS doesn't want to hinder someone from being able to get their citizenship if there is some sort of medical issue like that. But it is a much more intricate process. And I highly suggest if you think you fall in that category of exception, you reach out to us and you give us a call so that we can talk with you and give you some advice and see if you would meet the qualifications for that. Okay. And I'll have down here our number if you do want to call us for a consultation. Okay, so let's get back to our qualifications. So you have to have resided in the US for more than 5 years, and you have to have established residency in the city and state in which you are going to apply for citizenship. You can't go to an office in New York if you're living in Georgia. So, whichever state you're living in, and we handle all 50 states and we handle other countries as well, but as long as you've shown that you have residence in one of those 50 states, then that is where your application will be submitted ultimately and where you will go for your interview. So you will have to establish that you reside in one of our 50 states at that point as well. Okay. Other qualifications. You need to have good moral character. So this is where I think it's really important for a law firm, especially one like Stern Law, to be able to advise you. Many people that we come across, we speak with, and they say, well, I've been a green card holder for 15 years, but I had this one conviction in my past, and I'm just afraid to apply for my citizenship. I don't want to lose my green card. I don't know if I'll be granted because of that. And there are some things that could prevent you from being granted, but there are also exceptions. Um, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of those exceptions now. Specifically, things like if you had a violation, more than one violation of a controlled substance, if you had a a charge of gambling or a crime involving moral turpitude. And what that means is a crime kind of evil intent. So usually you're going to see crimes that involve theft. You might see crimes that involve violence, domestic violence, things like that. And there are some statutory bars that could prevent you from getting your citizenship if you file within the time period before you're eligible, in the time period in which USCIS reviews your good moral character. Okay. So let's talk about that. USCIS is primarily, and I say primarily because they're going to look at everything, going to focus on potential bars within the last 5 years prior to you applying. So oftentimes we will advise a client who maybe just completed a DUI treatment or conviction, or recently is on probation for a simple battery or a battery case, or has a felony probation that they're still on. We're certainly, first of all, going to advise that you let that 5-year statutory period pass. Okay. But that doesn't mean that you never have the opportunity. Now, it may be true in some cases, and that's why it's important to work with an attorney, provide the attorney with copies of all your documents, your disposition, what your sentence was, etc. So we can assess if you are outside of that 5-year statutory bar, that it may be in the discretion of the officer to still grant your citizenship. And sometimes that becomes a balancing test. And the further away you are from that particular crime. But those statutory bars can seem a little scary and can seem a little confusing. And our job at Stern Law is to help walk you through that process and verify and talk with you about the risks and the benefits, and also help prepare an application that will be the strongest one that you can submit. Okay. In terms of the good moral character, even if it's outside the 5 years, you still need to, just like you have through your whole process, disclose any past, even tickets. They ask about citations, especially if you paid more than $500, any convictions, which in Georgia, as some of you may know, includes any traffic offense. Georgia makes all traffic offenses misdemeanor convictions. It can include any felonies you've committed in the past, and all of that has to be disclosed and has to have documentation provided for. A lot of clients tell me, well, I already submitted this with my green card. They already asked me about it before, but you're going to be asked for it again at citizenship. Okay. Let's see. So far, no new questions. All right. So let me go through more of the qualifications for citizenship. The other thing, as I mentioned, is you will have to have a knowledge of the civics or the history of the United States. If you are thinking about citizenship, you can actually go to the USCIS website. That's uscis.gov and look up citizenship test. And there will be a link that will give you 100 questions. And in order to get your citizenship, unless you've met one of those specific exceptions that I talked about that are difficult, you need to memorize and learn those 100 US history and US government questions. Um, the officer will have a computer that selects 10 questions randomly from that list of 100 specific questions, and you have to answer 6 correct. So that's good. It's a 60%. That gives you some leeway if you get nervous, if they happen to pick the ones you don't know. But this is something I think that takes some people the longest because it's a lot of questions. And I used to be a history teacher. And even though I was teaching this, I had students who struggled with answering some of these questions. So it's very impressive to me that all of our clients who go through the citizenship process just know these answers to these questions on American history. And it's a great way for you also to kind of get to know the history of our country if you didn't have the opportunity to learn it in your home country. Um, there are also a number of YouTube videos that can help study for that. I think there's apps now that are created that sort of create flashcards for you to study. And the best way to do it is to be hearing the question in English because, like I said, those questions will be asked in English and you're going to answer in English. Um, so that is definitely one of the big things that we want to be doing. Okay, let's see. I have another question here that says, what if I'm not able to pass the citizenship civics test? Okay, so that's a great question. If for some reason you are unable in your first attempt and your first interview to pass the civics or even the English um, or the reading and writing, which we'll talk about in a second, you do get a second chance to come back. Now, obviously, you want everything to be finished that first day. So we always encourage that. But it's a stressful and nerve-wracking process, and people get nervous and forget things. So USCIS and the US government have allowed that sometimes you just need that second try to come back and a little extra time. The downfall of that is your return interview is not usually going to be for about 2 or 3 more months. So that will delay your citizenship process. But it is an opportunity available. The second part of the test that you take in middle at the beginning of your application, your interview is going to be the reading and writing. And they will provide for you a short sentence for you to read off of a screen and make sure that you can read it back to the officer. And then the writing process is the officer will tell you to write a short sentence and you write it on the screen with your finger or the stylus, and then the officer checks, and if it meets the standards to be able to pass, then that's a part of the English test that you have just passed, the reading and writing. Let's see, do we have any other questions coming in? I'm trying to think if I have missed any of the requirements. If you are a male in the United States, a lawful permanent resident who was in the United States between your 18th and 26th birthday. As many of you know, it's what used to be called registering for the draft, but it's basically registering with the government should there be a war. It's a requirement here of US citizens. And so if you are a lawful permanent resident at that time, between that time, or even if you were in the US between those years, then there are questions that your attorney can help you answer and make sure that you have met the requirements for that aspect. And then the final thing is you need to be willing to swear allegiance to the United States. There are some very special questions that are both at the end of your application and that are on the oath that you will essentially be taking. And basically, the US is asking you, are you willing to swear allegiance to the United States, to assist the United States if it becomes necessary, if you are asked to? It's not asking you to give up your culture, to say you don't like your home country, but it is saying, this is a big privilege. This is something you've worked hard for, and they ask you to swear your allegiance to the flag. And then those are the basic elements that you're going to look at for citizenship. All right, so let's see, we've got a few minutes left. So I do want to remind you, put your questions in the comments. If you're watching this after the presentation, please continue to put your questions in here. We ask that you put questions about the immigration process or criminal cases, but we also remind you this is a public forum. So if you have any private details that you want to discuss, you can call us at this number here. You can direct message us instead of putting it on the public Facebook. We are available to answer your questions and let you know, or even reach out to you directly so that we can give you some more answers or get you set up for a consultation. Let me do a brief summary in Spanish. Por los que están preparando para su ciudadanía, hemos tenido unas buenas preguntas y hemos visto los requisitos que uno tiene que haber vivido en los Estados Unidos como residente permanente por 5 años o más, solo que sea basado en matrimonio, si puede hacerlo en 3 años, si todavía está en el matrimonio por cual sacó su residencia. Eso significa que no ha salido del país más de 6 meses cada año y allí puede seguir. Lo otro que uno tiene que demostrar es que tiene buen entendido del lenguaje de inglés, menos que tenga unas excepciones. Tuvimos una pregunta de alguien que ha sido residente por 20 años, pero está un poco inquieta de su habilidad, especialmente en momentos estresantes como esto, para su inglés. Entonces, si alguien es mayor de 50 años, ha sido residente por más de 20 o 25 años, podemos revisarles si tal vez son elegibles para una exención de el inglés y pueden hacer su examen con un intérprete en su propio lenguaje. Entonces, si han estado esperando simplemente por su inglés, llámenos a ver si califican, porque sí vale la pena hacerlo, ¿verdad? Lo otro que hay que demostrar es que especialmente dentro de los últimos 5 años tiene buen carácter. El carácter moral, good moral character, de cual hablan, es importante de todo su tiempo, pero específicamente si ha tenido un arresto, una condena en los últimos 5 años, es importante que hable con nosotros para ver si es algo que le va a prevenir totalmente sacar su ciudadanía o si simplemente es de esperar unos años que han pasado para allí hacer la ciudadanía. Lo otro que tiene que hacer es dedicar y dar un juramento de soporte a los Estados Unidos, ¿verdad? No significa que tiene que decir que otros países son malos o que quiere dejar su cultura, que mucha gente tiene miedo. Es simplemente que usted está diciendo que está dispuesto a llamar a este lugar su país de ciudadanía de aquí para adelante y dar soporte a los Estados Unidos y las libertades que tenemos aquí. Y también si logra ser ciudadano, de allí sí puede empezar a llegar a votar y es muy importante. Um, so, other things that can get in the way of getting approved for your citizenship. So let's talk a little bit more about your criminal history. If you have any convictions for misdemeanors and particularly felonies, it's really important that you speak to an attorney. Even if it's outside of the 5 year bar, we always want to, or excuse me, the 5 year statutory period, we always want to make sure that there's nothing that could then endanger you in the case that you get denied citizenship that might put your green card at risk. Sometimes applying too early or without an attorney to properly advise you for citizenship could lead to a revocation of your green card. So it's really important that before you take that step, if there's been anything in your history, any issues in even in leading up to getting your green card, even if you felt they were resolved by getting your green card, it's really, really important you reach out to us and make sure that there's not going to be any hurdles, or if there are, that you're well prepared and supported by a lawyer who can help you in that process. Criminal convictions can certainly bar citizenship. Um, if you've abandoned your green card status, for example, you left the country for more than 2 years, and that comes up obviously in the interview, and maybe it hasn't been addressed, but there are always ways that they could say you abandoned your green card status. Um, Taxes. What that is one of the questions on the form. Have you paid your taxes specifically since you've become a lawful permanent resident? Once you become a lawful permanent resident, especially, it's very important that you file with the IRS. Now, if you don't owe taxes, then you may not have to file, and that we can explain. But if you were to have, for example, a tax debt of, let's say, $10,000, you started a business or you missed a year of paying your taxes, and now you owe the IRS, come and speak to us because that can be considered poor moral character by USCIS and it could lead to a denial. If you reach out to us, we can help you with that, help discuss with you how you get on a payment plan, what evidence you can show that it was not something that should bar you from getting your citizenship. Um, Other things that could get in the way, of course, not having your English speaking ability. That can be problematic. But in my experience, most of the officers understand that people are coming in many times with English as their second language. So again, you don't have to have a perfect accent. You don't have to be perfect grammar. You don't have to have perfect grammar, but you have to be able to understand the citizenship interviews are sometimes a conversation with the officer, and sometimes they try and ease your nervousness as well, and being able to have that conversation shows the officer that you have a basic understanding and a good proficiency, as we like to say in English. Let's see. So any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Right now, here's the good news. The citizenship process is taking only about 3 months. This is really one of the fastest processes that we're seeing in USCIS of any type of application. From the day we file those applications, usually within 3 months, at least here in Atlanta and the ones I've done in Alabama, the interviews are coming in about 3 months. So if you've been holding on and you've been waiting for the right time, today is the right time. This week is the right time to call and set up a consult because you could be a citizen maybe even before the election, right? And if it goes fast enough, who knows? You might actually be a citizen before the time you need to register for the election in your particular state. And if not, then you've got that ability to vote from here on in the future. So you could have a major impact on this year's election if it moves quickly. Um, the other reason that I think is very important that if you think you're eligible for citizenship, reach out to us because things happen. People get caught up in bad situations. And I've had many clients who are lawful permanent residents who say, I was about to apply for my citizenship. And then this incident happened, and I got pulled over. I got arrested. I got caught up in a bad situation. And now those clients are facing losing their green card. Whereas anyone who's a citizen who might have had those same issues, those same um, sort of errors or conflicts or rough times in their life are not suffering with that. So it's definitely worth having that security if you are in a place where you're able to do it. This is definitely the time to get your citizenship. We know how quickly these are moving. And in many cases, the even better news is I have seen in some offices the day that someone gets approved, if there's an oath ceremony space available, I've had clients who've gotten sworn in as citizens the very day they do the interview. That's not always the case. Sometimes it's a week later, but it is a quick process. USCIS, those days, the officers all seem happier, the attorneys seem happier, the clients seem happier. Those are some of the best days in immigration because applying for citizenship, for those of you who have never gone through the process, it's a long and tedious process. And to be able to see the joy and the satisfaction and the excitement about becoming a US citizen that I get to see in my clients' eyes, um, it really just reminds you why we work so hard for this, why I've taken on this type of job, but also it reminds you what the reason is that people want to come to the US, want to be a part of this country. Um, it's a great place, and we are constantly working on things, but we have wonderful opportunities for all, especially, and I would really focus on getting your citizenship if you are eligible. So again, lawful permanent resident for at least 5 years, unless you're applying through you're still married to the spouse through which you got your green card. That's 3 years. Give us a call. You can actually apply 3 months before you reach that deadline. So if you are at 4.5 years of being a lawful permanent resident, call us. We can start it now and file on the very day that you're eligible. But I highly recommend, especially if you've had any incident in your past, even if you had difficulty during your green card process or there were any mistakes that maybe USCIS thought you had used a different name and hadn't, all of that could come up again at your citizenship. So please reach out to us or reach out to any attorney who can assist you with your citizenship process. And we hope to have many more of you join the ranks and watch many more oath ceremonies and see those happy families united in that way in the future. I think that is going to be everything for us today. I really, really want to wish you all a happy 4th of July and a safe holiday weekend. I know it's going to be hot in Atlanta. I'm not sure how it is where you are. So, everybody stay cool and really enjoy your weekend celebrating the liberties and the freedoms that we're constantly working to defend, working to improve upon, working to grow on here in the US. Happy 4th of July, and thank you for your time. Leave your questions below if you have any when you're watching this after the fact, and please share our videos, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks.